Hello everyone, I'm Ryan. Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the histories behind today's biggest conflicts. When you hear the word Gaza, you probably think of rockets, airstrikes, and endless headlines. But there's a deeper tragedy here. We might not know who's ultimately to blame for starting this conflict, but one thing is clear. What prevents it from ending is the lack of governance, corruption, and division inside Gaza itself. And worse still, over the years, it has only gotten worse. Today, I'm gonna take you through the 100-year struggle over Gaza, a story of hope, betrayal, and violence that repeats in cycles, over and over again. For centuries, Gaza was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans ruled the land from the 1500s until World War I. Life in Gaza was far from glamorous. Small villages, farmers, and trade routes passing through the desert. But under Ottoman rule, Jews, Christians, and Muslims coexisted under a system called the millet, where communities managed their own affairs. That fragile coexistence began to change in the late 1800s. Jewish migration from Europe increased, driven by pogroms and persecution. At the same time, Palestinian Arabs, farmers, merchants, and tribal leaders worried about losing their land and influence. Then came World War I. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and Britain took control of Palestine. The world powers carved up the Middle East, and Gaza became a pawn in the game. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, promising a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. To Jews fleeing anti-Semitism, it was hope. To Palestinians, it was betrayal. They hadn't been asked. During the 1920s and 30s, violence escalated. Arabs rioted against British rule and Jewish immigration. Britain cracked down, but every attempt at reform collapsed. Gaza and Palestine became a land of strikes, protests, and bloodshed. And there we see the first loop, a moment of hope, followed by resistance, ending in collapse. Fast forward to 1947. The United Nations proposes partition. One state for Jews, one state for Arabs. For Jews, scarred by the Holocaust, it feels like survival. For Palestinians, it feels like theft. When Israel declares independence in 1948, Arab armies invade. Israel survives and expands. But Palestinians call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 are expelled or flee, many crammed into Gaza's refugee camps. Egypt takes control of Gaza. Palestinians dream of return. Israelis celebrate statehood. But the gap between hope and reality explodes again. 1967, the Six-Day War. Israel defeats Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in less than a week, seizing Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. For Israel, Gaza is now under occupation for security. For Palestinians, it's humiliation. Checkpoints, military patrols, and new settlements fuel anger. By the late 1980s, resistance erupts. The First Intifada, stone-throwing youths facing armed soldiers, captures the world's attention. The streets of Gaza are on fire. Then comes a glimmer of peace. The Oslo Accords of 1993 promise a Palestinian state. Hope rises. But assassinations, suicide bombings, and expanding settlements crush that hope. The loop closes once more. 2005, Israel withdraws from Gaza, dismantling its settlements and pulling out troops. For Palestinians, it looks like victory. Finally, Gaza is theirs to govern. But what follows isn't freedom. It's another war within. In 2006, the Islamist group Hamas wins election. They rise on the promise of resistance, charity networks, and clean governance. But their promise collapses almost instantly. By 2007, Hamas seizes Gaza by force. driving out its rivals in brutal street battles. Fatah officials are executed or thrown from rooftops. Families are torn apart, not by Israel, but by Palestinians fighting Palestinians. The world watches in shock. Gaza is now under Hamas's iron grip. Inside Gaza, daily life becomes suffocating. Dissenters vanish. Journalists are silenced. Hamas police enforce strict religious codes. Political opponents are jailed, or worse. Public funds meant for hospitals, electricity, and schools are siphoned off. While ordinary families ration bread and live in darkness, Hamas leaders live in luxury villas, some amassing millions through smuggling tunnels and foreign aid. Even Hamas's late leaders became symbol of this corruption, preaching sacrifice while sending their own families abroad to safety. They spoke of liberation, but many cared more about their power than the people they ruled. And yet, to the outside world, Hamas projects an image of endless resistance. Rockets are launched into Israel, sometimes targeting military sites, but often striking civilian neighborhoods. Each rocket invites retaliation. Each war devastates Gaza's people, not Hamas's leaders. For ordinary Palestinians, the dream of liberation turns into a nightmare. They are trapped between the blockade from Israel and Egypt and the authoritarian rule of Hamas. Once again, hope collapses into fear, betrayal, and bloodshed. The loop spins tighter. 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021. Each war follows the same script. Rockets, airstrikes, funerals, ceasefires, towers fall, families grieve, leaders make promises, and then silence until the next round. Each time, hope briefly flickers. Each time, mistrust and vengeance smother it. Today, Gaza remains blockaded. Its youth grow up knowing only war and shortages. In Israel, people live under the constant fear of rockets. Foreign leaders talk peace, but nothing changes. The loop keeps spinning, fueled by history, politics, and pain. So, after a century of wars, occupations, and failed peace deals, one thing is clear. Gaza's future doesn't just depend on negotiations with Israel or the international community. It depends on what happens inside Gaza itself. Because what prevents this conflict from ending is not just borders or armies. It's the lack of real governance, the corruption, and the bitter divisions that keep Palestinians themselves trapped in a cycle. And worse still, that cycle has only deepened over the years. Every generation grows up with less hope, less trust, and fewer chances to imagine a normal life. If nothing changes, Gaza's future will be darker than its past, an endless loop of suffering with no escape. The question isn't just whether Israel and Palestine can make peace. It's whether Gaza can find leaders who care more about their people than about power. Until then, this conflict will continue to spin, generation after generation. People find it easy to bash another country for their misfortune, but they often don't realize they need to pull themselves by their own bootstraps. Otherwise, no one will. I'm Ryan. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, hit like, subscribe, and share it. Because the more people understand this history, the closer we come to breaking the cycle. See you in the next one.